All right, today we're going to dive into a story that honestly sounds completely made up. We're talking about how a team of engineers figured out how to farm millions of tropical fish right in the middle of Israel's Negev Desert, one of the driest, most hostile places on the entire planet.
I mean, seriously, how do you even begin to do that? A desert is the absolute last place on Earth you'd expect to find a thriving fish farm. But the answer, well, it involves an ancient discovery, a brilliant change in thinking, and a system so unbelievably clever it almost seems like magic.
So, our story kicks off with a desperate hunt for water in the desert. But what they ended up finding was something nobody, and I mean nobody, could have ever predicted. So, picture this. You're drilling through solid rock, almost half a mile down, in a place that gets less rain than Death Valley. And then, all of a sudden, you hit a literal underground ocean. This wasn't just some little puddle. It was part of the massive Nubian Aquifer, one of the biggest underground water reserves in the world. The pressure was so intense, water just shot to the surface all on its own.
And this wasn't just any water. They called it fossil water. Why? Because it had been trapped down there since the last ice age, back when the Sahara was a giant green grassland. This water hadn't seen the light of day since the Stone Age. It's incredible.
But here was the huge catch. This amazing discovery, well, it seemed completely useless. First off, thanks to geothermal energy, the water came out at about the same temperature as the human body. Way too hot for crops. And second, after sitting in rock for thousands of years, it had become brackish, which is just a fancy word for salty. It wasn't as salty as the ocean, but it was definitely salty enough to kill just about every commercial crop they tried to grow with it. It looked like a total bust.
So, the project really should have just ended right there. I mean, any sane person would have capped the well and just walked away. But then, one scientist asked a question that changed absolutely everything.
You see what they did there? That question led to this brilliant shift in thinking. Instead of trying to force the water to fit their crops, they decided to find something that already fit the water. It was a total 180-degree reframing of the problem.
And the answer was thousands of miles away, in the tropical rivers of places like Australia and Africa. Fish like barramundi, tilapia, and sea bass, they naturally live in warm, brackish river mouths where fresh water mixes with the ocean. They were the perfect candidates.
And just like that, the two biggest problems became the two greatest assets. That useless geothermal heat? Well, it meant they didn't have to spend a fortune on heating systems like fish farmers do in colder places. And that deadly salt? It perfectly mimicked the stress-free environment that these specific fish had evolved to thrive in. And you know what? It worked. It worked like a charm. The fish adapted instantly. In just a few months, the Negev Desert was home to these massive fish farms. But as they scaled up to 1 million fish, they ran smack into a wall that every single fish farmer dreads. A new problem that threatened to poison the entire system from the inside out.
And that problem was waste. In a closed system like this, fish waste produces ammonia, and ammonia is incredibly toxic. We're talking concentrations as low as just 2 parts per million. That's enough to burn their gills, damage their nervous systems, and eventually kill them. The farms were literally becoming toxic.
But, faced with another seemingly impossible challenge, these engineers didn't see a pollution crisis. Nope, they saw another resource, just sitting there, waiting to be used. And here it is, the second aha moment. What is toxic ammonia to a fish? Chemically, it's nitrogen. And what is nitrogen to a plant? It's pretty much the most valuable nutrient for growth. Farmers spend over $100 billion a year on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, and these fish were just making it for free.
So they built this perfect closed-loop system. It's so elegant. First, the warm, salty water goes to the fish. Then, the nutrient-rich wastewater from the fish gets used to irrigate nearby crops that don't mind a little salt, like olive and date trees. And here's the beautiful part. The soil and the tree roots soak up all those toxic nutrients, acting as a giant living filter that cleans the water naturally. This was more than just a clever fix. It was a blueprint for creating abundance out of pure scarcity.
And get this. This is probably the most incredible part. Not only did the trees survive, they thrived. The fruit yields actually shot up by 15 to 20%. Turns out the slow, organic release of nutrients from the fish waste was way better for the plants than just dumping a bunch of synthetic fertilizer on them.
So this biological symbiosis was just amazing, right? But for a system like this to actually last, it has to make economic sense. And the model they came up with is just as brilliant as the science.
See, making fresh water from the ocean in Israel is expensive, but this brackish water from the aquifer, it costs nearly 90% less. That's a huge discount, but even that can be a bit much for one industry to handle on its own.
So they just split the costs. The fish farm pays the cheap price to pump the water out of the ground, they use it, and then they pass the wastewater to the crop farmers for free. So what's the result? The crop farm gets free water and free fertilizer, and the fish farm gets free waste disposal. It's a symbiotic economy where both industries actually make each other more profitable. It's genius.
The system worked. It was profitable, and it was turning the desert green. But the biggest surprise, the most important benefit of the whole thing, was something no one had even planned for.
That's right. This entire food production system actually removes more carbon from the atmosphere than it puts out. It's not just doing no harm, it's actively healing the planet.
So how does it do that? Well, it attacks emissions from every angle. It gets rid of the need for synthetic fertilizer, which is a massive global polluter. It uses natural geothermal heat instead of burning fossil fuels. And finally, all those thousands of new olive and date trees act as carbon sinks, literally pulling CO2 right out of the air.
And this isn't just some one-off miracle story in Israel. Because that Nubian aquifer lies underneath multiple countries, this model is starting to spread. Egypt and Saudi Arabia are already launching their own projects, which proves this is a real, replicable solution for dry nations all around the world. And that, right there, is the core lesson of this whole thing. The useless heat, the deadly salt, the toxic waste, every single problem became an advantage. They didn't try to fight the desert. They just found the right combination of things that would thrive because of those conditions, not in spite of them.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? It proves that sometimes the most groundbreaking solutions aren't found by trying to eliminate our problems, but by asking a totally different question. What is this problem actually perfect for? It just makes you wonder, what other impossible challenges out there are just a new perspective away from becoming a breakthrough?